Hello everyone, my name is Annie Lasley and I'm going to be discussing the Clean Air Act with everyone today. As can be assumed by the title, the Clean Air Act was created with the hopes of making the air cleaner and limiting the amount of pollution in the United States. To fully understand the necessity of this act, it's important to understand what was going on during this time. While this act was created in the 1900s, air pollution was becoming a problem far before this. A major historical event that yielded a large increase in air pollutants was the American Revolution, which began in 1793, almost 2 whole years before the enforcement of this act. This was a period characterized by massive scientific and technological advancements, including railroad expansion, factories, and electrical power, to name only a few. While this time yielded several beneficial advancements for the United States and its economy, it also witnessed a surge in the environmental pollutants that were being produced. This was heavily due to the burning of fossil fuels for energy. Coal was significant during this time because it was used as a primary source for steam engines, which were critical in powering factories and railroad systems. These factories previously relied on limited environmental resources to function. This could include a powerful flow of water from a stream, for example. These factors could be very unreliable or scarce, making coal a much better alternative. It was also an abundant and affordable resource that made acquiring it cheap and consistent. To use coal as energy, it must be burned. During this process, it releases heat that can be used as energy, but it also releases a multitude of harmful chemicals into the air, including sulfur dioxide, nitrogen oxides, and heavy metals. While a piece of coal can be quite small and therefore considered not to be harmful, it is important to understand just how much coal was being used. Coal was used to power railroads, factories, and steamships. It was also used to make the iron and steel that was used to build these big equipments and machines and factories. It was a critical resource. When World War II ended in 1945, the economy boomed, only increasing industrial demands and the use of burning coal. The immense use of coal led to the production of smog, or a mixture of smoke and fog that clouded major industrial cities. In 1948, in the town of Donora, Pennsylvania, 20 individuals were killed and 43% of the population were affected by a deadly smog. This town had 2 major factories, one that produced steel and wire and one that produced zinc products, and these factories spanned for miles in the town. The frequent smoke emitted from these factories made citizens accustomed to polluted air. However, in this specific instance, the pollutants mixed with a sudden cold front, and a town surrounded by hills trapped the air within the city, which made it very difficult to see and even harder to breathe. It was a perfect storm of unfortunate circumstances that led to this tragic event. The Donora smog incident led to the first epidemiological investigation of environmental disaster in the U.S., and is believed to have inspired the Clean Air Act. It is important to note that while we are discussing the Clean Air Act, which focuses on air pollution, pollution was occurring in other areas as well, such as in our oceans and our rivers. There are also many different factors that contributed to the air pollution of that time, and the combination of these factors made the situations so much worse. Another important event of the time was the space race between the United States and the Soviet Union, where launching rockets released rocket exhaust that was harmful to the upper atmosphere and the ozone. All of these factors, and even more not mentioned, called for a change to be made. There was also a heightened social awareness of these conditions that encouraged the government to act. In 1962, Rachel Carson wrote and published a book titled Silent Spring that discussed a dangerous pesticide and warned people of its polluting effects. This book and its message made the public more aware of their effect on the environment and sparked a need for more environmental considerations and protection. President Lyndon B. Johnson was the first president to sign the Clean Air Act into law in 1963. During his time as president, he signed about 300 environmental conservation measures into law, including clean air, water quality protection, limiting pesticide use, and protecting endangered animals. He did a lot to try and restore and maintain the natural beauty of the United States, including adding 50 new national parks. Richard Nixon was the president who signed the amended and more developed Clean Air Act into law on December 31st, 1970. Nixon is most commonly thought of in a negative context for his involvement in the Watergate scandal, followed by his resignation from presidency in 1974. However, President Richard Nixon made several advancements in protecting the environment during his term. Nixon created the Environmental Protection Agency, or the EPA, which still works to this day to protect the environment of the United States. Aside from the Clean Air Act, he signed in several other important policies, including the National Environmental Policy Act, the Endangered Species Act, and the Marine Mammal Protection Act. He created the Legacy Parks programs and the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. Despite his shortcomings, President Nixon wanted to improve the environment for its citizens. The Clean Air Act of 1963 was established a federal program to address air pollution within the Public Health Service and promoted research that would find the best control techniques. It gave power to the states so they were allowed to create their own standards and programs. In comparison, the Clean Air Act of 1970 by Richard Nixon created the EPA, allowing the federal government to have more power over the states in enforcing air quality regulations. This amendment added more pollutants and sources to their list of concerns that needed to be addressed. The Clean Air Act was written by U.S. Congress and passed unanimously in the U.S. Senate. In the House of Representatives, it was a 374-1 vote. The Clean Air Act regulates emissions into the air from stationary and mobile sources. Stationary sources could be factories or plants, while mobile sources include transportation and specific equipment. Under this act, stationary sources are required to have state-of-the-art air pollution controls installed into both new and existing facilities, if they are not already in place. Specific areas of concern are factories that use coal-burning power, oil refineries, and plants that make acid, glass, and cement. All of these facilities can release harmful chemicals into the air if not properly prevented. If released, these harmful chemicals can cause birth defects, cancer, environmental destruction, and long-term illnesses. Mobile sources is a term used to describe equipment with engines. Vehicles is what typically comes to mind when thinking about mobile sources. However, this category includes generators, farm and construction machines, and lawn and garden equipment as well. Under the Clean Air Act, before any vehicle or engine is imported into the United States, they must have an EPA-issued certificate of conformity that proves the equipment meets all the relevant emissions requirements. There are also regulations on fuels that ensure they meet certain standards before use to prevent harmful emissions. If the fuel is produced in the United States, there is a required minimum amount of renewable fuel that must be in it. To regulate the emissions of harmful pollutants, the EPA is authorized to create National Ambient Air Quality Standards, also called NAAQs, for every state. These NAAQs were to be introduced alongside state implementation plans, which would apply to each state individually by considering the prominent industrial sources for each. There have been several amendments to this act since it was signed into law in 1963. The original goal was for each state to create and meet their NAAQs by 1975. However, these goals were not met by all states, so the amendments that occurred in 1977 and 1990 extended this deadline. Between 1970 and 2020, the combined emissions of common pollutants dropped by 78%. Proving the Clean Air Act to be highly effective in its reduction of air pollution. It has been a critical component of reducing the amount of lead, nitrogen dioxides, sulfur dioxides, and other chemicals from the air that we breathe. This reduction in air pollutants has resulted in significant health benefits in air that is safer to breathe, therefore reducing associated medical costs. To be more specific, lead has been reduced by 99%, ozone pollutants have been reduced by 32%, and fine particle concentrations have been reduced by 41%. This progress has been significant and continues to be ongoing. While most of the results of this act have been positive, there have been some unexpected costs that have been presented. With the implementation of new equipment that reduces pollution comes some very costly measures to make it, install it, and even replace old systems in some cases. Another unexpected outcome that resulted from the Clean Air Act was an increase in unemployment. Many people previously worked in jobs that contributed to air pollution, and when anti-pollution actions were put into effect, several people lost their jobs. They have also found some issues from reducing pollution in one area that it actually led to an increase in the pollution in another. Despite these unexpected outcomes, the primary purpose of the Clean Air Act to reduce air pollution was successful. As the world grows and advances, new pollutants are inevitable, so it will be important for these policies to accommodate these changes. That's my presentation on the Clean Air Act, and I hope everybody was able to learn something new. Thank you for watching.